The sound was beautiful, in its own terrible way. Not a bang, not a whimper, but a collective dying hiss. 6 industrial-grade gas stoves, all running at full tilt for the Maple Creek annual community potluck, sighed their last breath in unison. The cheerful cacophony of bubbling chili, searing ribs, and sizzling onions died, replaced by a sudden, profound silence. A dozen heads popped up. "What was that?" someone asked. Mrs. Gable, a woman whose culinary optimism could power a small city, tapped the knob on her 6-foot garland range. Nothing. She tapped it again. "My chili!" she cried, a note of genuine panic in her voice. "The beans aren't tender!" A collective groan rippled through the community kitchen. This was a level 4 culinary disaster. The ribs were only half braised. The mac and cheese was still crunchy. The potluck, the social linchpin of our pristine suburban existence, was DOA. I, however, remained calm. I leaned against a stainless steel prep table, took a slow sip of my lukewarm coffee, and ran the diagnostics in my head. Simultaneous, clean failure across all appliances on a single utility line. No pressure drop, just a hard cutoff. Not an accident. This was surgical. Sabotage. Petty, precise, and smelling faintly of desperation and lavender potpourri. Carol. My gaze drifted out the window to the house across the green, a beige fortress of conformity where Carol, our beloved HOA president, resided. I could almost feel the smug satisfaction radiating from her perfectly sealed, triple-paned windows. Mrs. Gable looked at me, her face a portrait of despair. "Mike, what are we going to do? The potluck is in 2 hours." I looked at her tragically motionless chili. I considered the options. Option A, do nothing, maintain my carefully constructed cover as a boring, prematurely retired tech consultant, and face the grim reality of eating cold, store-bought potato salad. Option B, rectify the situation, expose a microscopic fraction of my actual capabilities, and be rewarded with a bowl of Mrs. Gable's legendary 5-alarm chili. My stomach rumbled, making the decision for me. The chili was a compelling argument. I sighed, a theatrical sound of long-suffering reluctance. I pushed myself off the table. "Don't worry, Mrs. G," I said, my voice resonating with a confidence that felt both foreign and familiar. "Give me 3 minutes." As I walked out the door, leaving behind a room of confused and hopeful neighbors, I couldn't help but wonder how I got here. How a man who once disabled a rogue nation's centrifuge program with a bent paperclip and a piece of chewing gum was now deploying his very particular set of skills to rescue a neighborhood potluck. It all started, as most suburban disasters do, with the color beige. 3 weeks earlier, I was standing in my own front yard, basking in the glorious, soul-crushing anonymity I had so carefully purchased. Maple Creek wasn't just a suburb. It was a testament to the power of restrictive covenants. Every lawn was precisely 3 inches tall. Every mailbox was the same shade of inoffensive black. Every house was a variation on a theme of tan. It was the perfect place to disappear. A place so profoundly, aggressively boring that no one from my former life would ever think to look for me here. My current project was a fence. Not a normal fence. A fence that would surround my backyard and obscure the workshop I was building. A workshop that was, to put it mildly, not HOA compliant. I was staring at a paint swatch. The color was gentle fawn. It was one of 4 pre-approved fence colors. The other 3 were whispering wheat, hushed sand, and, for the truly adventurous, muted clay. The process of getting this fence approved involved a 27-page application, 3 separate satellite image printouts, and a soil composition report. I'd negotiated nuclear disarmament treaties with less paperwork. "It's beige," said Dave, my contractor. He was a man whose personality was as no-nonsense as his tool belt. His face, weathered by decades of sun and skepticism, was fixed in a permanent squint. "They're all beige, Mike. Just pick one." "It's not that simple, Dave," I said, holding the swatch up to the light. Gentle fawn has subtle gray undertones. Muted clay leans more towards pink. It's a critical decision that will affect our operational aesthetic for the foreseeable future. Dave just grunted and went back to hammering a post. His son, Leo, a kid who seemed to be surgically attached to his phone, looked up. "He's right, Dad. Color psychology is a real thing. Gentle fawn promotes a sense of calm, while muted clay can subconsciously increase anxiety." "The only thing giving me anxiety is this conversation," Dave muttered. I was in the middle of explaining why the fence posts needed to be sunk into 4 feet of concrete, not for stability, but to properly ground the subterranean fiber optic network I was planning, when she appeared. It was like a scene from a nature documentary. A predator, sensing a disturbance in its territory, emerging from the brush. She marched across her immaculate lawn, a clipboard clutched to her chest like a holy text. She didn't walk. She proceeded. Her sensible shoes made no sound on the grass. Her blonde helmet of hair was impervious to the gentle breeze. She stopped before us, her shadow falling across the gentle fawn swatch. She didn't introduce herself. Titles were more important than names in this jungle. "I'm the HOA president," she announced, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. "A pleasure to meet you," I said, offering a friendly smile that I could feel cracking on my face. "I'm Mike, the new variable in your controlled experiment." The joke, if you could call it that, sailed about 3 feet over her lacquered hair. Her eyes, the color of a faded legal document, narrowed. "I'm here to deliver this," she said, thrusting the clipboard at Dave. "It's a formal notice of violation." Dave took the paper, his squint deepening. "A what now?" "Bylaw 74C, subsection 8, she snapped. "All contractor vehicles must be parked a minimum of 6 inches from the curb to allow for unobstructed street cleaning access. Your truck," she pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Dave's Ford F-150, "is parked with its tires touching the curb. The violation is logged at 1.5 inches of non-compliance." I peered over Dave's shoulder. She had included a photograph, taken from a low angle, with a tape measure clearly showing the infraction. Dave looked from the paper to his truck, then back to the paper. "You're kidding me." She did not look like she was kidding. She looked like she had never kidded in her entire life. This was my moment. I could have pushed back. I could have argued. But in my line of work, you learn to handle local assets with care. You don't antagonize the tribal chief on your first day. You placate them. "Thank you," I said, my voice dripping with sincerity. "Thank you for your incredible vigilance. It's people like you, the true sentinels of order, who keep communities like this from descending into utter chaos. That 1.5-inch discrepancy could have been the thread that unraveled the very fabric of our society. We are in your debt." Carol blinked. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She was processing. Was this sarcasm? Or was this the genuine, heartfelt respect she so rightfully deserved? Her brain, unaccustomed to such a complex social algorithm, defaulted to the latter. A faint, triumphant smile touched her lips. "See that it's moved," she said, her authority restored. She turned on her heel and marched back to her beige fortress. Dave watched her go, then turned to me, his expression a mixture of awe and horror. "What was that?" "De-escalation," I said, patting his shoulder. "Phase 1 of local integration." "You've made a friend for life, pal," he grumbled, trudging over to his truck to move it 6 inches. That's the plan, I said quietly to myself. Because I knew, with the certainty of a well-calibrated compass, that Carol was not an asset. She was a threat, and threats needed to be managed. The Maple Creek Community Kitchen and Patio was, I had to admit, a nice piece of infrastructure. Shared grills, commercial-grade appliances, a big covered seating area. It was the one place in the neighborhood where the iron fist of the HOA seemed to loosen its grip. It was neutral ground, a suburban Switzerland. I'd been roped into attending the potluck prep by Mrs. Gable, a woman in her late 70s with the energy of a hummingbird and a smile that could disarm a hostile warlord. She was the neighborhood's beating heart, and her chili was rumored to be a transcendent experience. "You're too pale, Mike," she'd told me, grabbing my arm as I tried to retreat into my garage. "You need some sun and some society." So there I was, leaning against a counter, watching the community in action. Dave, the BBQ enthusiast, not to be confused with Dave, the contractor, was meticulously applying a dry rub to a rack of ribs that looked bigger than my torso. A group of women were laughing as they assembled a mountain of salad. The air smelled of garlic, smoked paprika, and genuine human connection. It was nice. My internal monologue, however, was running a full diagnostic. The kitchen's workflow was horribly inefficient. The prep stations were too far from the sinks, creating a logistical bottleneck. The ventilation system was underpowered for the BTUs being generated, a clear fire hazard. I made a mental note to discreetly upgrade the exhaust fan motor in the dead of night. "Carol hates this, you know," Mrs. Gable said, stirring her enormous pot of chili without looking up. "She says the cooking smells are olfactory pollution." "What does she want it to smell like?" I asked. "Nothing." "Probably," Mrs. Gable chuckled. "She tried to pass a bylaw last year limiting outdoor cooking to odor-neutral foods, boiled potatoes mostly. It did not go over well." This was valuable intel. Carol's animosity wasn't random. It was targeted at the very heart of the community she was supposed to be leading. She saw this joyous, delicious chaos as a rebellion. Just then, as if summoned by the mention of her name, the devil herself appeared. Carol strode onto the patio, her face set in a familiar mask of disapproval. Her target today was not a misplaced truck, but Mrs. Gable's cheerful humming. "Mrs. Gable," she said, her voice cutting through the happy chatter. "I must ask you to be mindful of Bylaw 22A regarding unapproved auditory emissions. Your humming is exceeding the 40-decibel limit for a residential common area." Dave, the BBQ guy, let out a snort. "Oh, for crying out loud, Carol." Mrs. Gable, bless her heart, simply smiled. "It's a happy hum, Carol. It helps the beans cook." A half-dozen other neighbors murmured their agreement. For the first time, Carol was facing a united front. She had no clipboard, no tape measure, no leg to stand on. Defeated, she glared at the group, her eyes promising retribution, and retreated back to her beige castle. 10 minutes later, the gas went out. And that's when I knew this was no longer a Cold War. She had escalated. She had fired the first shot in a battle for the soul of Maple Creek, and that shot was aimed directly at Mrs. Gable's chili. So I made my promise. "Give me 3 minutes." I walked out of the kitchen, my mind already shifting gears. The suburban simulation faded away, replaced by the cold, hard logic of a mission. Objective: restore gas service. Obstacle: one petty tyrant and a locked utility hub. The hub was a quarter-mile away, tucked behind a small copse of perfectly spaced HOA-approved maple trees. A 6-foot chain-link fence surrounded a squat, windowless concrete building. A large metal sign, weathered by the sun, read, "Gas Distribution Hub, 3B. Authorized personnel only. Danger." To anyone else, it was an impassable barrier. To me, it was an invitation. As I approached the fence, I did a quick situational analysis. No cameras, no motion sensors. The only security was the fence itself and the lock on the gate. It was a standard-issue master lock 7040. A hardened steel shackle, a dual-ball locking mechanism, and a 4-pin tumbler core that a moderately intelligent hamster could bypass. It was, frankly, a personal insult. I reached into my wallet, past the credit cards and the photo of a dog I didn't own, part of my cover, and slipped out 2 small, thin pieces of metal. A tension wrench and a hook pick. I knelt by the gate, inserting the tension wrench into the keyway and applying a whisper of torque. My internal monologue kicked in, a familiar, comforting cadence. Pin 1, standard. Click. Pin 2, standard. Click. Pin 3, a spool pin trying to be clever. Apply counter rotation. There's the false set. Now lift past the shear line. Click. Pin 4, standard. Click. The lock popped open with a satisfying thunk. Total time, 4 seconds. I slipped the lock off, opened the gate just enough to slide through, and re-latched it behind me, leaving the lock hanging to make it look untouched. Phase 1 complete. Now for the building itself. A heavy steel door was set into the concrete, secured by a C-series electronic keypad. 10 digits, a star key, and a pound key. Cute. I recognized the model instantly. It was a favorite among mid-level government contractors in the early 2000s. Its major selling point was its durability. Its major flaw was a firmware vulnerability in the bootloader that was discovered in 2008 and that most installers never bothered to patch. I pulled out my phone. It looked like any other smartphone, but it was running a custom operating system I'd built myself. I opened a black terminal window with glowing green text. A few taps brought up a command interface. I initiated a low-energy Bluetooth handshake, found the keypad's unpatched service port, and sent a simple string of code that commanded the system to bypass its authentication check. Run bypass_C_series.exe P by 7741. Auth override success. The steel door emitted a loud clunk as the magnetic lock disengaged. I pushed it open and stepped inside, the door swinging silently shut behind me. The air was cool and smelled of steel and ozone. The room was a compact maze of pipes, valves, and control panels. A bank of monitors showed pressure readings and flow rates. On the main diagnostic screen, a single, blinking red light told the whole story. Manual shutdown, Sector 7. Remote command received. Amateur hour, I muttered to myself. A proper shutdown would have triggered a system-wide alert and a report to the main gas company dispatch. This was a localized, brute force command, likely triggered by someone with low-level access who knew just enough to be dangerous. Carol must have called in a fake emergency, some story about smelling gas, and convinced a lazy operator to hit the kill switch for our sector. Restoring it wasn't as simple as just turning it back on. That would send a sudden surge of pressure down a line that was now full of air, a recipe for a potential explosion. It had to be done carefully. I moved to the main control manifold. It was a beautiful piece of engineering, all polished chrome and color-coded wheels. I felt a pang of professional pride. This was my world. First, I bypassed the lockdown protocol that prevented reactivation. A simple physical override, hidden behind a small panel labeled Emergency Use Only. Next, I had to purge the air from the line. I found the bleed valve for Sector 7 and slowly cracked it open, a quiet hiss filling the room. I watched the pressure gauge on the main line, waiting for it to stabilize. Finally, the moment of truth. I gripped the large yellow wheel that controlled the main flow to our neighborhood. It wasn't about strength, it was about feel. I turned it slowly, smoothly, reintroducing the gas into the line, my eyes glued to the digital flow rate monitor. I had to match the pressure perfectly, tricking the system into thinking it had never been off at all. The needles settled, the flow rate was stable, the blinking red light on the monitor turned a steady, healthy green. Mission accomplished. Total time from leaving the kitchen to now. 2 minutes, 47 seconds. I walked out, locking the door behind me. The keypad automatically re-engaged. I slipped the master lock back onto the gate, clicked it shut, and gave it a gentle tug. Secure. No trace. I strolled back toward the community kitchen, whistling a cheerful, non-humming tune. Just as I reached the patio, I heard it. The collective, joyful roar of 6 gas stoves igniting at once. I walked into a hero's welcome. The room erupted in cheers. Mrs. Gable, tears in her eyes, rushed over and enveloped me in a hug that smelled of paprika and victory. "Mike, you're a miracle worker," she cried. I just shrugged, affecting an air of detached nonchalance. "Must have been an air bubble in the line," I said, repeating the line I'd prepared on my walk back. "Happens all the time with these older systems." Most people nodded, accepting this plausible, if vaguely technical-sounding, explanation, but my celebration was cut short. The patio door flew open with such force that it slammed against the wall. There stood Carol, her face pale, her chest heaving. Her plan, her perfect petty revenge had been thwarted, and she knew who was responsible. Her eyes, burning with the fire of 1,000 suns, locked onto mine. A single, trembling finger rose and pointed at me. "You!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You did this! You tampered with the gas lines! That's a felony, a federal offense! I'm calling the police!" The arrival of the police did little to dampen the potluck's revived spirit. If anything, it added a frisson of excitement, a dash of primetime drama to our suburban paradise. 2 police cruisers, lights off, rolled silently to a stop by the curb, and from them emerged officers Miller and Finch. Miller was the archetypal jaded cop. He wore his uniform like it was a heavy burden, and his face was etched with the profound weariness of a man who had seen every flavor of human stupidity and was no longer surprised by any of them. Finch, his partner, was the opposite. He was young, bright-eyed, and had the earnest posture of a man who still believed he could make a difference, one noise complaint at a time. They found me exactly where Carol had left me, sitting at a picnic table, a plastic fork in one hand and a heaped bowl of Mrs. Gable's now perfectly tender chili in the other. "Ma'am, what seems to be the problem?" Miller asked, addressing Carol but looking at the general scene with an air of deep resignation. Carol launched into her story. It was a masterpiece of frantic, slightly unhinged accusation. She gesticulated wildly, her voice rising and falling with dramatic flair. She talked about the gas going out, my suspicious walk, my 3-minute timeline, and my impossible, miraculous restoration of service. "He went to the distribution hub," she declared, pointing at me again as if I might dematerialize. "He's some kind of saboteur, a utility terrorist." Officer Finch was dutifully taking notes, his brow furrowed in concentration. Officer Miller, however, was looking at me. He wasn't looking at a terrorist. He was looking at a man in cargo shorts peacefully eating chili. Miller finally turned his full attention to me. "Sir," he began, his voice flat, "did you at any point this evening tamper with a public utility?" I took another bite of chili, chewing slowly and thoughtfully before swallowing. The beans were indeed perfect. "Officer," I said, looking up with my most harmless, non-threatening expression. "I'm not entirely sure what tampering even entails. The gas went out. I went for a short walk to contemplate the transient nature of potluck success. The gas came back on. If enjoying this truly excellent chili now constitutes a federal crime, then I suppose I'll have to plead guilty. Mrs. Gable, who was standing nearby, chimed in. "He's a hero, officer! He saved my chili!" Carol was practically vibrating with rage. "He's lying! Look at him! So calm! It's unnatural! Check his hands for grease. Check his shoes for hub dust." Miller let out a long, slow sigh. It was the sigh of a man contemplating a career change to something less stressful, like bomb disposal. "Ma'am, hub dust is not a thing, and I can't arrest a man for taking a well-timed walk." But, Carol sputtered, her argument collapsing under the weight of its own absurdity. To placate her, Miller agreed to check out the hub. He and Finch got back in their cruiser and drove the quarter-mile down the road. I continued eating my chili. 15 minutes later, they returned. Miller approached our table, alone this time. "Well, the gate to the hub is locked up tighter than a drum. The lock doesn't look like it's been touched. We called the gas company. They said their remote systems are showing some anomalies." He paused, studying my face. "They said the system registered an on-site manual override that was executed with textbook precision, but was completely unauthorized and left no electronic signature. They said it was, and I quote, a physical impossibility." I just shrugged. "Sounds like they need better systems." Miller stared at me for a long moment, a flicker of something, not suspicion, but deep, profound confusion in his eyes. He leaned in closer. "Look," he said, his voice low, "I've been a cop for 20 years. My weirdo meter is pretty well calibrated, and right now, it's screaming. I don't know who you are, and I don't know what you did tonight. Frankly, I don't want to know. But I do know one thing." He nodded discreetly towards Carol, who was now angrily lecturing a bush. "That lady is a hornet's nest with a clipboard. Watch your back." He straightened up, tapped his hat, and walked away. Officer Finch, however, lingered for a moment. He caught my eye and gave me a look of pure, unadulterated awe, a silent acknowledgement from one connoisseur of the strange to another. The incident cemented my status in the neighborhood. To Mrs. Gable and her cohort, I was a local hero. To Carol, I was a public enemy. And to my contractors, who had witnessed the whole bizarre episode from the sidelines, I was an enigma. Dave, the contractor, was bewildered. "I don't get it," he said to me the next morning as we stood by the fence posts. "The cops come, the gas is on, and everyone's happy. How'd you do it?" "Like I said," I replied, "air bubble." Leo, however, was not buying it. He cornered me while his dad was getting more concrete from the truck. His eyes were wide with the thrill of conspiracy. "Dude," he whispered, "that was not an air bubble. I saw you. You weren't gone long enough to walk to the end of the block. Seriously. Who are you? Are you with the CIA? Mossad? Can you teach me how to do that lock thing?" I just smiled and picked up a bag of concrete. "Practice, Leo. Lots and lots of practice." He wasn't wrong to be suspicious. He had no idea how much practice it had taken. And he had no idea that Carol's declaration of war meant my retirement was officially over. Carol did not take defeat well. In her mind, she hadn't been outsmarted. The system had simply failed her. So she took matters into her own hands. The petty war, as I later dubbed it, had begun. Her first move was surveillance. A high-end, motion-activated security camera appeared on the side of her house, its unblinking lens aimed directly at my property. It was accompanied by a spotlight powerful enough to signal low-orbiting satellites, which dutifully flooded my bedroom window with the light of 1,000 suns every time a leaf fell from a tree. Her second move was propaganda. A 10-page, single-spaced newsletter was slipped under every door in Maple Creek. It was titled, "Vigilance in the Face of Domestic Terrorism," and was filled with veiled warnings about mysterious new neighbors and the unexplained phenomenon of our public utilities. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive paranoia. I could have ignored it. I could have bought blackout curtains. But where's the fun in that? My old training manuals had entire chapters on psychological operations. It was time to get a little creative. Operation Annoy Carol commenced that evening. The spotlight was my first target. A quick scan with my phone revealed it was a popular, smart brand, connected to her home Wi-Fi. It took me less than 5 minutes to find a backdoor into her network. Her password was, predictably, HOA President 1. I didn't disable the light. That would be too obvious. Instead, I wrote a small script. Now, every time the motion sensor was triggered, the light didn't just turn on. It cycled slowly through a 7-color rainbow pattern. My bedroom was now bathed in a gentle, pulsing rave. The next day, I saw her on a ladder, smacking the light in frustration. I politely suggested she might have faulty wiring. Next, the sprinklers. Carol's lawn was her pride and joy, and her sprinkler system was timed to go off at precisely 5 a.m. every morning. Using a few spare parts from my workshop, a Raspberry Pi, a small solar panel, a moisture sensor, and the wheels from a broken toy truck, I built a tiny autonomous rover. Each night, under the cover of darkness, my little sprinkler saboteur would roll onto the edge of her lawn, mist its own sensor with a fine spray of water, and trick her multi-thousand-dollar irrigation system into thinking it had already rained. Within a week, her prize-winning roses began to look suspiciously thirsty. For the newsletter, I fought fire with fire. I created a satirical counter-newsletter, which I printed on high-quality parchment paper and delivered myself. I called it The Maple Creek Whisperer. It was written from the perspective of an anonymous, concerned neighbor and detailed the growing tyranny of the Beige Committee. It celebrated small acts of quiet rebellion, like planting non-approved petunias or leaving garbage cans out for an extra 5 minutes. It became an instant underground hit. The war of petty annoyances was a pleasant diversion, but I knew a professional confrontation was inevitable. It arrived in the form of a white van with the gas company logo on the side. A man named Stan, whose severe haircut and by-the-book demeanor screamed "Senior Field Technician," knocked on my door. He held a tablet displaying a report that I knew, from the baffled look on his face, made absolutely no sense. "Mr. Smith?" he began, using the bland alias on my deed. "I'm Stan, from the gas company. I'm here to do a follow-up inspection regarding the incident last week." "Of course," I said, ushering him toward the side of my house where the gas meter was. "Happy to help." Stan performed a series of routine checks, his movements stiff and practiced. He clearly wasn't expecting to find anything. The real reason he was here was to talk to me. "The report on the Hub 3B override is confusing," he said, trying to sound casual. "It says someone manually recalibrated the entire system in under 3 minutes without leaving a trace. Our engineers say that's impossible." This was my chance. Not to confess, but to confuse. To overload him with so much high-level technobabble that he would retreat in bewildered defeat. I peered at his tablet. "Are you guys still using the G7 manifold on Hub 3B? I asked, feigning casual curiosity. "That's a bold choice. The pressure regulators on that model are notoriously prone to thermal drift, especially in a humid climate like this. It creates ghost fluctuations that can be misread by the central system as a manual intervention." Stan's eyes widened slightly. How would you know that?" "Oh, just some basic engineering I picked up," I said breezily. "I'm surprised you haven't upgraded to the G8 series. Much more reliable bypass protocols. You should really check the secondary flow rate sensor. I bet if you pull the raw data, you'll see a ghost anomaly of about 0.5% right before the shutdown. It's a classic sign of a remote signal spoof interfering with the G7's outdated firmware. Basic stuff, really. I continued on for another 2 minutes, dropping terms like isobaric recalibration, piezoelectric actuators, and asynchronous data packets. I didn't really know if any of it applied to his specific system, but it sounded impressive as hell. Stan looked like his brain was melting. He stared at me, then at his tablet, then back at me. He was a man who understood pipes and valves, and I was speaking a language from another planet. He cleared his throat. Right, well, everything here looks normal. He packed up his tools in a stunned silence. As he was leaving, I heard him on his phone with his boss. No, sir, I don't think it was a local. The guy in the house, he was talking about asynchronous data packets. I think our system was hacked, maybe by a foreign entity. Leo, who had been helping me by holding a screwdriver and listening to the entire exchange, looked at me with a newfound reverence. He was no longer 100% sure I was Jason Bourne. He was now 110% sure. And I knew that Carol's next move would have to be something big. Having failed to defeat me on the legal front with the police, the surveillance front with the rainbow spotlight, and the technical front with poor Stan, Carol shifted her strategy. She couldn't get me out, so she decided to rally the entire community against me. And she found the perfect weapon to do it. It turned out Maple Creek was a finalist for the prestigious American Community of the Year award. It was a B-level award, somewhere between tidiest cul-de-sac and best use of beige siding. But to Carol, it was the Olympics. Winning would be the ultimate validation of her reign. It would prove that her iron-fisted enforcement of the rules wasn't tyranny, it was the blueprint for perfection. An emergency HOA meeting was called. It was held in the community kitchen, the very scene of my triumph, a fact that did not go unnoticed by either of us. Carol stood before the assembled neighbors, her voice filled with a gravity usually reserved for announcing a declaration of war. "Friends, neighbors," she began, "we are on the cusp of greatness. Next Saturday during our annual 4th of July block party, the final judging committee will be making their inspection tour." A murmur of excitement went through the room. "This is our moment to shine," she continued, her eyes sweeping the room before landing directly on me. "Which is why it is imperative that we present a united, compliant front. Any unseemly structures," she paused for dramatic effect, "or community disruptions could jeopardize everything we've worked for." The message was clear. My half-built, non-compliant workshop was unseemly. My very existence was a disruption. She was painting me as the one man standing between Maple Creek and eternal glory. It was a masterful political move. I didn't care about the award, but I saw her play instantly. She was building a case. She would use the inspection as a pretext to get the city to issue a stop work order on my project. She might even be able to get a temporary injunction, claiming I was a public nuisance. The war was about to go nuclear. The days leading up to the block party were tense. Carol was a whirlwind of activity, directing neighbors to trim hedges, repaint mailboxes, and power wash sidewalks. She was in full General Patton mode. She even tried to give me a list of suggested improvements for my property, which I politely thanked her for, and then used as a coaster. I knew she was planning something big for the day of the inspection. She wouldn't be able to resist the opportunity to frame me as a menace in front of a captive audience. I just didn't know what it would be. Her plan, as I would later piece together, was born of desperation and fueled by a series of late-night YouTube tutorials. She had seen me receive a delivery of several large propane canisters for the BBQ grills we'd be using at the party. Her twisted logic went something like this. She would create a real gas problem at the hub, something small but alarming. Then, she would have an anonymous witness, herself on a burner phone, report seeing me near the hub right after it happened. The narrative would be perfect. The dangerous new neighbor with his faulty propane tanks, had caused a feedback surge and tried to fix it himself, once again endangering the entire community. This time, with the judges as witnesses, she'd have me. It was a desperate, brilliant, and catastrophically stupid plan. I saw her through my own security cameras, which were, of course, far superior to hers, studying the hub from her window with binoculars. I saw her accept a package from Amazon containing a single, large pipe wrench. She was preparing for her final move. And I knew that on the 4th of July, there would be fireworks of one kind or another. The 4th of July dawned bright, hot, and humid. The community green was a sea of red, white, and blue. The air smelled of freshly cut grass, sunscreen, and the promise of grilled meat. It was the perfect picture of American suburban bliss, a living, breathing cover for a Community of the Year brochure. The judges had arrived. There were 3 of them, 2 men and a woman, all wearing identical navy blue blazers despite the sweltering heat. They looked serious and judgmental, like they were about to sentence someone to death, not award them a plaque. Carol was fluttering around them, pointing out the uniformity of the flower beds and the pristine condition of the sidewalks. The block party was in full swing. Dave the BBQ guy was manning the grills, a cloud of delicious smoke billowing around him. Kids were running through sprinklers. Officer Miller and Finch were on duty, leaning against their cruiser and looking profoundly bored. I was in my element, assembling a massive burger, when I saw it. Carol, laughing at something one of the judges said, discreetly checked her watch. She made an excuse about needing to check on the dessert station and peeled away from the group, heading not towards the food tables, but in the direction of the woods that hid the gas hub. My internal alarms went off. I had, of course, taken precautions. After my last visit, I had accidentally left the gate to the hub unlatched, secured only by the hanging lock. I wanted to see what she would do. I just didn't expect her to be this insane. We see the scene as if, through her eyes, a shaky, first-person camera of incompetence. She reaches the hub, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and righteous fury. The gate opens easily. She slips inside. She approaches the steel door, but the keypad is no obstacle. Her YouTube research had yielded a master code, 1234 asterisk, that, of course, didn't work. Frustrated, she noticed a small ventilation grate near the bottom of the door. Using her new wrench, she pried it off. It was just big enough for her to reach an arm through and pull the manual release lever on the inside of the door. A small victory. She was in. Inside the cool, humming room, she felt a surge of power. This was the heart of my supposed magic. It was just pipes and wheels. Her eyes scanned the room, looking for the main shutoff. A big red wheel, clearly labeled Main Shutoff. Her tutorial video had been very specific. Turn clockwise to close. She put her wrench on the valve stem and heaved. It didn't budge. It was torqued down by professionals, not designed for a woman fueled by pure spite. She grunted, putting her entire body into it. The wheel groaned. It moved. An inch, 2 inches. She was doing it. Except she wasn't. In her rage-addled state, she had forgotten the most basic rule of mechanics. Lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. She was turning it the wrong way. She wasn't closing the main valve. She was opening the secondary high-pressure emergency purge line. A low growl turned into a deafening, terrifying hiss. A plume of near-invisible gas began to pour into the room. Alarms, real alarms this time, started screaming from a dozen panels on the wall. A piercing siren began to wail from a speaker on the roof of the hub. Back at the party, every head snapped up. The siren cut through the music and laughter like a knife. Officer Miller and Finch straightened up, their boredom instantly replaced by sharp-edged adrenaline. The judges looked at Carol's empty space, then at the woods, their expressions shifting from judgmental to alarmed. And then the smell hit. The pungent, rotten egg stench of mercaptan, the chemical additive that gives natural gas its distinctive odor. And it wasn't a faint whiff. It was a thick, gagging wave that rolled over the party. I froze, burger halfway to my mouth. I sniffed the air once, twice. My brain, my real brain, the one I kept locked away behind the sarcastic retired guy facade, took over. The calculations were instantaneous and horrifying. Concentration, 10%, rising fast. Lower explosive limit, 5%. Wind speed, 5 knots, heading directly towards us. Ignition sources, approximately 12 active grills, 50 cell phones, 2 police cruisers, 100 static-producing humans. Evacuation time, not enough. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a shutdown. This was a bomb waiting for a spark. I dropped the burger. The facade of the quiet neighbor evaporated. The real me came out. "Everybody back!" I roared, my voice carrying a command authority that silenced the entire park. "Shut off the grills, now! No phones, no sparks! Get inside the community center, go!" People were frozen in confusion. I locked eyes with Dave the contractor, who was standing near me. "Dave, get them inside, now!" He saw the look in my eyes, and didn't hesitate. He started herding people towards the building. I turned to Leo, who was staring at me, his face pale with terror. "Leo, you're with me. Grab the biggest wrench from your dad's truck." He just nodded, his phone dropping from his hand, and sprinted towards the parking lot. The suburban simulation was over. The mission was live. I ran. Not a jog, not a sprint, but the kind of ground-eating, desperate run you do when you know every second is the difference between a close call and a crater. The smell of gas was overwhelming. A physical presence that clawed at the back of my throat. Leo, bless his terrified heart, met me at the edge of the woods, holding a 2-foot pipe wrench like it was a holy relic. "What's happening?" he yelled over the screaming siren. "The crazy lady broke it," I yelled back, not slowing down. "She broke it bad!" We burst through the trees and into the clearing. The hub was enveloped in a shimmering, heat-haze cloud of pure, natural gas. The sound was a physical blow, a high-pressure roar that vibrated in my teeth. Through the haze, I could see Carol, huddled in a corner against the fence, sobbing. No time for her. I ripped off my polo shirt, handed it to Leo. "Cover your mouth! Don't breathe deep! Stay right behind me!" We plunged into the cloud. The gas was cold, chilling my skin. My eyes watered instantly. Inside the hub, the scene was chaos. Pipes were vibrating, and the roaring was deafening. I saw the problem immediately. The big red wheel, the main shutoff, was untouched. It was the wheel next to it, the emergency purge valve, that was wide open, venting thousands of cubic feet of gas directly into the atmosphere. "It's the purge valve!" I screamed at Leo over the noise. "She opened the damn purge valve!" I put the wrench on it and threw my weight against it. It wouldn't budge. The pressure forcing it open was immense. It was like trying to close a fire hydrant with a toothpick. "It's not going to hold!" I yelled. Plan A had failed. Time for Plan B. "I have to divert the main flow. Cover me!" It was a meaningless command, but it made Leo feel useful. I spotted the main flow manifold on the other side of the room. It had a massive secondary wheel, a manual bypass designed for exactly this kind of catastrophic failure. It would divert the gas from this local hub to an emergency flare stack a mile away, where it could be safely burned off. I used Leo's shoulder as a brace, planted my foot on a support pipe, and gripped the bypass wheel. It was stiff from years of disuse. I pulled, my muscles screaming in protest. Metal groaned against metal. The roaring sound lessened slightly. It was working. "Okay, it's diverted," I gasped, my lungs burning. "But the pressure in the local line is critical. We have to vent it before it blows back." I looked back outside. The entire neighborhood, the judges, the cops, Mrs. Gable, everyone, was standing at the edge of the woods, a silent, horrified audience to my one-man disaster movie. My cover, my quiet life, it was all blown. Fine. I had bigger problems. I made a decision. I pointed to a small, glass-covered panel on the wall. It had a single, large red button inside. "Leo, open that panel. See the red button? When I tell you to push it, you push it like you're trying to push a hole through the wall. Understand?" Leo, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and adrenaline-fueled purpose, nodded vigorously. I shimmied up a thick trunk-line pipe like a monkey, my hands finding grips I didn't know were there. Near the ceiling was a small, manual release valve, a tiny spigot designed for fine-tuning pressure. It was our only hope. I gripped it with both hands and turned. A controlled, high-pressure jet of the remaining gas shot harmlessly towards the ceiling and out the vents. The pressure in the local line began to plummet. "Now, Leo!" I screamed. "Hit it!" Leo slammed his palm onto the button. With a series of loud, satisfying clunks, the hub's emergency systems engaged. Blast shields slammed down over sensitive equipment. Foam nozzles hissed to life, and the main valves closed, sealing the hub in a safe, controlled lockdown. The roaring stopped. The silence that followed was more profound than any noise. I slid down the pipe, my body trembling with adrenaline, covered in sweat, grime, and the faint, oily residue of the gas. I had done it. I had averted a major catastrophe in front of a live studio audience. I stumbled out into the fresh air, gasping. The judges were staring, their mouths agape. Mrs. Gable had her hands over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Officer Finch looked like he was about to faint from sheer excitement. Officer Miller just slowly, deliberately, shook his head, a look of "I knew it" on his weary face. He and Finch walked past me, their steps purposeful. They stepped over the sobbing, incoherent form of Carol. Miller looked at me, then at the hub, then back at me. "You," he said, his voice gravelly, "have a lot of explaining to do." He then turned and knelt beside Carol, pulling out his handcuffs. "But her first. Ma'am, you're under arrest for reckless endangerment, criminal mischief, and about 6 other felonies I'm going to have fun looking up." As Finch helped a broken Carol to her feet, a strange sound began. It started with a single person, Mrs. Gable, clapping her hands slowly. Then Dave the contractor joined in. Then Leo. Within seconds, the entire crowd of neighbors had erupted into a roar of applause and cheers. I had saved them. I was their hero. And I was in a world of trouble. A week later, I was sitting in my nearly finished workshop. The air smelled of sawdust and fresh paint, a scent far more comforting than natural gas. The space was my sanctuary, a testament to over-engineering. The walls were soundproofed. The electrical grid was independent of my house. The workbench was bolted to the concrete floor. It looked like a normal workshop, but it was built like a bunker. A black, government-issue sedan was parked in my driveway. Sitting across from me at my new workbench was a man in a perfectly tailored but unremarkable suit. His name was Marcus, and he was my former handler. He was the ghost I had moved to Maple Creek to escape. "You know," Marcus said, taking a sip of the coffee I'd made him, "when we set up your retirement package, quiet was the operative word. Quiet, anonymous, boring. We did not envision you becoming a local folk hero by preventing the unscheduled demolition of a suburban block." I just shrugged. "She started it." "She always does," he sighed. Marcus explained the fallout. My little adventure had lit up every watch list from here to Langley. The moment a civilian name cross-referenced with a Level 4 override of a public utility, Flags went up. A lot of them. My carefully constructed alias, Michael Smith, tech consultant, had been blown to smithereens. However, he continued, a faint smile playing on his lips, you also did us a favor. Carol's incompetence highlighted a significant vulnerability in the civilian grid's security protocols. By preventing a disaster, you gave several agencies the political leverage they needed to push through some mandatory upgrades. The official story, he explained, was being carefully curated. I was a former safety consultant for the gas company who just happened to be in the right place at the right time. My record was being scrubbed, my file resealed, I was getting a pass. But this is the last one, Mike, Marcus said, his tone turning serious. The absolute last. Try to keep a lower profile. No more saving the day. If the neighborhood cat gets stuck in a tree, call the fire department. Understand? Loud and clear, I said. More coffee? He declined, got up, and left as silently as he had arrived. My secret was safe, more or less. My retirement was back on. Life in Maple Creek settled into a new kind of normal. Carol, facing a mountain of legal trouble, had sold her house and disappeared. The HOA, in a state of shock, had been temporarily reformed with Mrs. Gable as the interim president. Her first official act was to abolish Bylaw 74C, subsection 8, and the entire approved color palette. The neighborhood slowly began to show signs of life. A purple door appeared here, a string of wind chimes there. It was becoming a community instead of a compound. My workshop was finally finished. Leo was helping me install the last tool rack. He still looked at me with a reverence usually reserved for astronauts and rock stars. So, he said, trying to be casual. Safety consultant, huh? The best, I said with a straight face. His dad, Dave, walked in, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked around the workshop, at the organized tools, the clean floor, the ridiculous amount of power outlets. He clapped me on the back. Well, for a safety consultant, you sure know how to handle a wrench, Mike. You ever want a real job, you let me know. It was, I think, the highest compliment he could give. Later that evening, I was sitting on my front porch, watching the sun set behind houses that were no longer all beige. The air was calm. For the first time in a long time, so was I. A familiar figure came walking up my driveway. It was Mrs. Gable, holding a large, still warm Tupperware container. Brought you something, she said, handing it to me. My victory chili. She sat with me on the steps for a while, and we just watched the neighborhood. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. After she left, I opened the container. The rich, spicy aroma filled the air. I took a bite. The beans were perfect. I had my workshop, I had my peace, and I had a community that, against all odds, had accepted me for who I was. Their weird, wildly overqualified, and slightly heroic neighbor. I looked out at the colorful, chaotic, imperfectly perfect neighborhood I now called home. My internal monologue, quiet for a whole week, flickered back to life. Okay, maybe the quiet life isn't so bad after all. Now about that faulty neighborhood electrical grid. I smiled. Retirement was going to be interesting.